Okay, so on to passage 3 of practice test 4. This is called A Few Words About Bats. This passage is just about how people have wrong ideas about bats. You know, they're like, oh, bats, vampires, blah, blah, blah. They think it's all scary, but they're not as bad as people think. So let's get to it. 31. It says, the movie Dracula, featuring its bat-like title character who feeds on human blood. All right. What's wrong with this question right off the bat is that you notice it has the IT apostrophe S form. That means it is. What this actually is supposed to be is ITS, it's, okay, the possessive form. You know, his is the possessive form of he, her is the possessive form of she. In this case, it's supposed to be, what is it's referring to? Well, the movie Dracula, and again, it's the movie Dracula's bat-like title character, and so it's possessive. So the no change would be wrong here. What about with its? Sure, that works with its possessive form. Okay, what about based on its? This is wrong because there is no plural possessive, plural apostrophe. That's just grammatically incorrect. You would need really just the apostrophe there just to have any kind of, you know, it is type of situation. Or in this case, if you just have this plural, if it's just ITS, it's grammatically incorrect to have that apostrophe. You just wouldn't have that situation. What about D? Whose? This is also an issue where it's very similar to ITS. In this case, it's WHO, who is. So this is also not possessive at all. Okay, so that's what's wrong with that. The other problem, this is, you could say, a secondary problem, but who is only referred to people, and the movie Dracula is a thing, it's an object, it's a title, it's not a person. So the only answer choice that works is B. What about 32? It's just one of many sources of people's ideas about bats that are flawed. Okay. Well, there's nothing really wrong with this. But let's see if there's something better. It's if you look at F, no change, let's see if there's something better. It says, ideas that are mistaken about bats. That's okay, but if we look at H, what is better about this? Well, you have a shortened way of putting it. Instead of saying that are mistaken, you can just say erroneous. You can take all these three words and just turn them into one word. And what if you say mistaken ideas they have about bats? Same issue. If you just had mistaken issues about bats, that would be fine, but you don't have to say they have, right? So that's why G and J are wrong. H is definitely the most concise, the most straight to the point. And F, aside from the fact that it's just a little wordy, that it could be worded more shortly, some people might say it's just one of many sources of people's ideas about bats that are flawed. You could say that, I mean, some people might say flawed is modifying bats. That's sort of arguable, but really the main correction is that everything is, all the wordiness is tucked inside together into this one word, erroneous. And it's very clear that what's wrong here, it's not bats that are wrong, it's ideas that are wrong. Everything is super clear and it's short, concise, and it's just the fastest, easiest, clearest way to write it, okay? 33, let's go to 33. It says, the facts about bats are more interesting than the falsehoods. Well, what's being compared here? Because you have this construction more than, that's comparing just exactly two things, right? Well, what's being compared are the facts and the falsehoods. Is there anything wrong with this? This more than that? This is more interesting than that? You can't, there's no interestinger, so it is more interesting, right? Everything seems fine. What about of more interest? The facts about bats are of more interest than, okay. This is not technically totally wrong. It's sort of less clear way of putting it. The main problem is the word THEN. It should be than, okay? The adverb than, more than. Got it? The not then means first this, then this. It kind of denotes like a difference of time. At first this happened, then this happened. But this is used for comparison purposes. More than this, less than that. So that's the problem here. D has the same problem, and then C's problem is it says most interesting. Most is superlative. That's when you're comparing more than two things. So if I'm comparing one with this and that, that's like four things being compared all together. So anytime you have three or more things, you can have the most, right? But in this case, only two things are being compared, so it's more. All right? That's why C is incorrect. So the correct answer is A, no change. All right, on to question 34. So let's see what it says. It says, just take three of the most common misconceptions about bats: that they are dangerous to humans, that they are rodents, and that they cannot see. What you'll notice right off the bat is that you have this list, okay? That they are this, that they are that they are that. 1, 2, 3, all right? And this list, just like all proper lists, follows a parallel structure, meaning it says that they verb, that they are, that they cannot see. Okay? That is perfectly fine. Well, whenever you have a list, the proper punctuation for a list is a colon. In a colon, you need to have the first part of it an independent clause, meaning there has to be a subject and verb that comes before the colon, and then after the colon, it basically needs to say whatever the list is, or just a further specific explanation or just definition of it, okay? And this part doesn't have to be a complete sentence. And certainly here, this is not a complete sentence, that they are, because if you have this relative pronoun that is a relative pronoun that basically makes this whole thing an adjective for bats. And same with this middle part of the list and the last part of the list. They're basically just big adjectives. So there's no subject and verb. So you certainly couldn't have a semicolon, because in a semicolon, you have to have a subject verb, semicolon, subject verb separately. And you only have it on subject verb on one side, so a semicolon would make this sentence grammatically incomplete or incorrect. J obviously is fine because of that colon, but if you have G and H, commas and nothing don't basically are not the correct punctuation you need to do. You need to separate something from the rest of the list, so those do not work. If you just read them, if you just had a comma or you had nothing, they'd basically be different variations of run-on sentences. Okay. So let's go to 35. 35, it says, and even these do not draw nourishment from human blood, semicolon. So semicolon, new sentence. They bite cattle and horses in their sleep. Okay. The confusion when you read this is what's sleeping? Because he says there, right? Well, you don't know if there is referring to bats or is it cattle and horses. Whose sleep is it? Which there? This is an issue where that's called pronoun antecedent, like lack of connection, where a pronoun has to be clearly referring to something, okay? Well, it's not clear. Is it the bats or is it the cattle and horses? Well, obviously the bats are not sleeping when they're biting them, right? It's probably the cattle and horses are sleeping. So this is just wrong because of the ambiguity. So A wouldn't be correct. What about they bite sleeping cattle and horses? Oh, this is perfectly fine. Because what's sleeping? The cattle and the horses. Perfectly good. What about C? They bite cattle and horses when they are asleep. Same problem. You don't know what they is referring to. They is the pronoun here. Is it the horses and cattle or is it the bats? We have no idea. What about D? While asleep, they bite. Same problem. We have no idea what it's talking about. Or actually, in this case, it is a bit clear, but they is bats, and it says while asleep. What would make most sense is that the bats are what they is, or the bats are sleeping, but this doesn't actually make logical sense anymore. How can they be biting them while they're sleeping unless they're sleepwalking, which is certainly, I'm sure, not what they're trying to say. How So none of these make logical sense or are very clear except for B. What about 36? If you go to 36, it says some people believe that bats are rodents. Semicolon, others think bats are a kind of bird. Okay, the problem or a lack of problem, the things you have to focus on is the semicolon. Is there any problem here? With a semicolon, you have a subject verb, semicolon, subject verb. Do you have subject verb? People believe, subject verb, others think, subject verb. That's perfectly fine. No problem. Good, everything's good. If we go to 36, no change. Yep, that seems to be right. What about G? G. The problem with G is that you have others, comma. Well, why would you have a comma between others and think? There's no reason to have a separation between the subject and the verb, just like you don't say orange juice is you don't say orange juice, comma, is good, right? You just say orange juice is good. Same thing, no comma between the subject and verb. Also, because you have this is a new subject and new verb, there needs to be a comma and a conjunction like and or but or something like that, okay? But in this case, with just a comma, it creates a comma splice, which basically just means connecting two independent clauses with comma and nothing else. So G is wrong. What about H? H is a total run-on sentence. It doesn't have the problem of this comma. There's no comma, which is great. But the problem is that there's no punctuation like a semicolon or a period or a comma and a conjunction at all. So H is a straight run-on sentence, and J, rodents and others. The problem with this is that others, there's a new verb here, think, right? So others needs to be a noun, a proper noun. But in this case, this is just a possessive noun. Others is what? It's like saying his what? You cannot say his went to the store, right? You would say he went to the store. Just like you wouldn't say others with an apostrophe went to the store. You need to say others without an apostrophe went to the store. And even if that was true, even if that was the case, the other problem would be you need some kind of comma there, all right? To separate a subject and a verb from another subject and a verb in the same sentence, you need the punctuation in addition to the conjunction, not just the conjunction. Let's go to 37. Oh, shoot. 37. Although winged bats are not related to birds, because even if a bat's furry, small body may appear mouse-like, bats are not rodents either. Okay. Well, let's see, because this seems like this is a logic issue. Although winged, bats are not related to birds. Okay. And then it says bats are not rodents either. And it says if a bat's small furry body may appear lifelike, bats are not rodents either. Well, what are rodents? They're like mice and rats and hamsters and stuff like that. Guinea pigs, I guess. Well, if they're small and furry bodies, that might appear mouse-like, right? Well, if they're small and furry bodies are like mice, they appear like mice, wouldn't they appear to be rodents? But it says they're not rodents, so there needs to be some kind of contrast word to indicate that. Just like in the first part, there's a contrast word although. Although they have wings, they're not birds. And although they look like mice, they're not rodents. Okay? Because even if is not a contrast phrase, the problem with A is, again, it doesn't have that contrast, so it doesn't logically make sense. What about whether? First of all, if you have whether, whether is not a proper conjunction as itself. It says you have this subject and verb, right? And then you have to have this new subject and new verb. So after here is a new independent clause, and so And so whether by itself needs some kind of conjunction before it, okay? You cannot just say, although winged bats are not related to birds, comma, whether. You'd have to say comma and whether, all right? The other problem is whether isn't exactly like a particularly good contrasting phrase. It's better than because even if, because whether basically means whether or not a bat's body appears mouse-like, it doesn't matter. Well, it sort of changes the meaning, because whether or not a bat's body appears mouse-like, well, bats' bodies are mouse-like. It's not even a matter of sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So it just logically has a different meaning, and it just doesn't fit well. And then obviously because of the lack of conjunction before whether, if you just have whether after the comma, it's a run-on sentence, a comma splice, meaning just a comma separating a subject verb and a new subject verb. And then what about the word and although? Oh, that works fine, because although by itself can't be the start of a new independent clause, but because it has the word and, that's fine. And it has that proper contrasting phrase, although. What about seeing as? That is not a contrast. That's like saying because it is this way. Seeing as you're really hungry, let's go get some cake, something like that. So C is the only one that makes sense for grammatical reasons and logical reasons. All right, 38. 38 says, rather, bats are a unique order of mammals called Chiroptera, the only mammals that truly flies. Okay. The main problem here this is what we're talking about, okay. The unique order of mammals called Chiroptera. Is there any problem here? Not really, because what's going on here? You have this noun, and then you have a modifying phrase that comes after. The only mammals that truly flies, okay? That's like saying, and oftentimes some people think it makes more sense to have it in the beginning. Like if they see, oh, it's at the beginning of the sentence and they understand it. Like if I say a sentence like, the only mammals that truly fly, comma, Chiroptera is a really unique mammal, blah, 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 blah. They would say, oh, that's correct. That's just a properly placed modifier. But if they have it at the end, some students get confused. Maybe that's the issue. But there really doesn't seem to be any problem here. This is just a big adjective describing Chiroptera. And this is proper grammatically with the comma separating that, okay? And if this came in the middle of the sentence, you would need a comma there and a comma after before the sentence would continue. But it says, G, they are. Well, the problem here is a unique order called Chiroptera. They are. The problem with this is that it has a new subject and a new verb, okay? They are. So this creates a run-on sentence, a comma splice, meaning comma, comma with the word, they are, a new subject, new verb. That would be incorrect. With a new subject, new verb, again, you need some kind of conjunction and a comma. And if you look at the sentence as is, it says the only mammals that truly flies. All you have is a noun here, mammals, and then this is a relative clause, basically a big adjective that describes mammals. So there's no verb there. So that's perfectly fine. So that's why it acts as a big adjective. All right. What about H? So they are. Well, now you have proper punctuation, proper, separation of the independent clauses, comma, so, but the problem is logically it doesn't make sense. It's a Chiroptera. If you say so, that means because, or it basically means as a result or consequently, but how could that make sense? Is it they're a unique order of mammals that are called this, and because they're called this, that's why they can fly? That doesn't make sense. So that would not work. What about J? Chiroptera, being. Being does not work. Being would not work because, again, like I've said in previous questions, whenever you have the word being or having in a question, the worst one is being. It's almost always wrong unless, and basically if you pick being as an answer choice, you better be really, really sure, or it better be like in every single answer choice, because being is basically a participle for the word to be. Well, if it's to be means is, right? Well, why do you need to say is? Why can't you just say it? You don't need to say the word being, right? So I don't need to say Eric being a boy. You can just say Eric, comma, a boy, comma. Do you see that? So this really just makes the sentence overly wordy. The other problem is even if you had the word being, you'd probably need a comma right before. And the other thing is it almost makes it logically not make sense, because if you say being the only mammal that flies, it's like saying there are a unique order of mammals called Chiropracta. If you have the word being, it almost implies because they're the only mammal that flies, rather than just this is the name and this is what they do. Okay? If you have that because, it makes it seem like one causes the other. There's a slight like it slightly implies that. And so that would be also grammatically just confusing logically. All right? Okay. 39. 39. The only mammals that truly fly. Okay. The problem here is that it says the only mammals that truly flies. Well, what are truly flying? Mammals, right? Is that plural or singular? Well, that is plural. And what is flies? Flies is singular. And that looks like a D. And this looks horrible. That's an S. Okay. All right. Oh, well, it's plural, singular. That's a verb disagreement. So, so what needs to be done is this needs to be changed to adjust to that. So it would have to have the only mammals that truly, or that can truly fly, C would work. Fly is a plural form. What about is able to? Is singular. There's that other problem where you have the mammals is. That doesn't make sense. And what about has? Has is also singular. And so C is the only answer choice that has plural, plural. Okay? 40. It says, these bats sending out high frequency sounds and using the echoes that bounce back from objects to locate their prey and to navigate. Okay. You basically just have prepositional phrase, prepositional phrase, prepositional phrase. Okay, those are the non-essentials. And it says the echoes that bounce back. So you have this word that. So what are the echoes that bounce back from object? Okay. This is a relative clause, so probably this whole thing is a prepositional phrase, or not a preposition, a relative clause, part of the that clause. So what's going on? This is a subject. Well, where's the verb? The verb is not going to be here. Okay, there's no verbs here. Not conjugated verbs. What about sending and using? Well, this is okay in the sense that it's parallel. It's sending and using. Okay, so it's saying it's doing this and doing this. Okay, and in situations like that where they're basically like short lists, you need to make sure that they're grammatically structured in the same way. There's parallel structure. The problem is that sending and using by themselves are not verbs. They're present participles. They're it's just the ing form. And you could say these bats like are sending and are using the echoes. That would grammatically make sense, but even that wouldn't work because the rest of the sentence is in the present tense, because it talks about what bats do on a general basis, not on, like one time or something like that. So when you talk about an animal that does something or anything that does something on a general, consistent basis, you just use the present tense, like I eat breakfast, I eat lunch. It doesn't have to mean I'm doing it right now, but it just means, yeah, I do that. That's something that I do. at least every once in a while. So in this case, the problem is that it's a sentence fragment. I know it's very long, but there's no verb, so F wouldn't be correct. All right, use is proper here. Use is proper here, but sending again is improper, and it's not parallel. What about sent out? Sent out high frequency sounds to use. First of all, this would be incorrect because this is not a past tense paragraph. This is not like these bats, you know, these bats named Rick and James sent out this stuff last night. No, it's not talking about the past tense, but I'm talking about the present tense. So, so whenever have a present tense, you know, form throughout the paragraph, you need to keep that consistent. And then again, if you use to use, that actually changes the meaning of the sentence. That's like saying whatever they use, whatever they're sending out, the purpose is to use, as opposed to they send out and use something. Okay, so this actually logically changes the meaning. And if you go to J, it says send out high frequency sounds and use. So use, send. That's perfect. Present tense, and it's parallel, so everything works here. So, good job, Jay. Let's go to 41. Given that all the following statements are true, which one provides the most relevant information at this point in the essay? Well, what does 41 say? In addition to being fascinating creatures, bats are useful to humans, especially farmers. Oh. They're very useful. So how are they useful to farmers? Well, that's what's relevant. Like all wild animals, bats may bite if handled. Is that useful? Is it useful if they bite you? No. What about bats pollinate plants, including fruit trees? That is useful, and it's particularly useful to farmers because farmers are, you know, dealing with plants and fruit and stuff. What about some plants have developed special mechanisms to attract bats? That has nothing to do with being useful to us and has nothing to do with farmers necessarily. It has something to do with plants, but not about how, let's say, I don't know, how maybe, I mean, why would it be useful if a bat is just attracted to a plant if it just, you know, if it just goes to the plant and like licks it or something for no reason? What about D? Bats have eyes adapted for poor lighting conditions. That has nothing to do with their use value, and that has nothing to do really with farmers, nothing directly at least. So the only answer choice that makes any kind of logical sense, that provides the most relevant information, is B. Go to 42, it says the writer is considering deleting the preceding sentence from this paragraph. If the writer made this deletion, the paragraph would primarily lose what? Well, what does 42 say? For example, bat caves are being disturbed or ruined as highways and housing developments are built. Well, what does it say? There's one sad piece of news about bats. Their habitats are being destroyed by humans. Oh, sad. Well, this seems to be an example of that, right? So, what would it primarily lose? Well, information that distracts from the main message about the extinction. Is it distracting? Well, no, it's not distracting. It's relevant. It's like, you know, just an example of, right? What about G? An example of ways readers can stop the destruction of bat habitats. Is this about, oh, like, you can do this to save bat habitats? No, it's not. It's just saying that it's happening, okay? What about scientific proof of the statement that bat habitats are being destroyed? Is this scientific proof? Like, you know, according to research done by blah, 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 blah. No, it's not really scientific proof. What about evidence for the claim that bat habitats are being destroyed? Is it evidence for the claim that bat habitats? Yeah, it does seem to be evidence. It's like, oh, sadly, bat habitats are being destroyed. And an example is this way, okay? So J does seem to work. It would load that evidence, just a good example of why or how we know, or you know, in what way bat habitats are getting chopped up or replaced with other stuff. So J works. 43, the writer wants to provide a phrase here that will tie the conclusion of the essay to its beginning. Which choice does that best? Okay, well, what does it say? We should protect bats because though they might seem threatening, they are an important and beneficial part of life. Well, what was the beginning of this about? The beginning was about how they seem like, they're Dracula and they're blood-sucking, but actually, these are all misconceptions. And the rest of the essay was about bats are actually this way and this way and this way, different from, the stereotype. So, yeah, this has a lot to do with that beginning part, how they might seem threatening, right? So there seems to be no problem with this. What about though they mostly come out at night? This doesn't really have to do with that beginning part about the prejudice against bats. What about C, though their habitats are vanishing? And D, even if we rarely see them, none of these really have anything to do with the beginning about the prejudice and the Dracula and the blood-sucking and the fear people have about bats and whatever. So which choice ties the conclusion to the beginning? No change, okay? Which is though they might seem threatening. What about 44? The writer is considering deleting the last sentence of the first paragraph of the essay. If the writer were to make this deletion, the essay would primarily lose a statement that what? The first were to make the deletion. So what would be the answer here? It's saying the last sentence of the first paragraph. Okay, if you take this out, it says, just take 3 of the most common misconceptions about bats. That they are dangerous to humans, that they are rodents, and that they cannot see. Well, what is this doing? This sentence is just setting up, it's sort of like, you have like this double thesis statement, this double sentence thesis statement, and the second part is just being more specific. And every paragraph corresponds to one of these things. So that they are dangerous to humans, well, this first paragraph is about how they're not dangerous to humans. And then the second paragraph is about how that they are not rodents. And the third paragraph is about how they're not actually like completely blind. So what this does is it says what each paragraph is going to be about. So what about F, introduces the organization of the next 3 paragraphs? Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it does. What about G, summarizes points made earlier in the paragraph? No, there's no summary about points earlier in the paragraph. It's just, it's maybe describing certain things more. It can give you more detail, but it's not summarizing them because these were never mentioned before. What about provides a list of the kinds of creatures bats have been compared to? No, it doesn't compare bats to anything. Does it add much needed touch of humor to the essay? No, this is not, you might find it funny, but that's not what this is doing. This is just, this is basically setting up the structure of the entire essay. So that's why the answer is F. And last one, suppose the writer's goal had been to write an essay focusing on the various ways in which people are causing the extinction of some bat species. Would this essay fulfill that goal of saying, people are causing extinctions of bats for these reasons? Well, it doesn't really talk about that much. It just mentions that bat species habitats are, becoming bulldozed down, and that could have an effect on bat population, but it just mentions it at the end. What is most of the essay based on? Most of the essay is based on people having wrong ideas about bats, and let me tell you 3 of the most common things, and let me tell you why they're wrong. So if you have A, yes, because the essay explains in detail that bats have many enemies, including humans, who pose the greatest threat of all to bat survival. Well, it doesn't say humans are the biggest threat, and it doesn't explain in detail, okay? And it doesn't really say what their enemies are. I mean, humans possibly, because building stuff, but that's just one. Yes, because the essay focuses on the misconceptions people have about bats. Well, the second part is true, but it doesn't talk about why people, the various ways people are causing the extinction. So this reason doesn't relate to that, okay? Wrong. No, because the essay primarily focuses on people's mistaken ideas about bats, not on ways in which people are causing the extinction. Yeah, it just talks about, oh yeah, people think they're bloodsuckers and dangerous, and people think this and this. That's all wrong, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's what the whole essay is about. So sure, and no definitely makes sense, because it doesn't really talk about how people, you know, or the different ways we're causing their extinction. And then if we look at D, it says no, because the essay indicates that not all bat species are at risk of becoming extinct, only the ones that feed on livestock. It doesn't say only livestock bats are becoming extinct. And it doesn't indicates that not, well, it doesn't even really say that not all bat species. It just says, you know, it's just somewhat vague about it. It doesn't really say all or specific ones. It just says bat habitats are getting hurt, basically, or getting bulldozed and replaced by human settings and stuff. So the only answer choice that actually makes sense is C. You have the right choice here, because the essay doesn't involve the different ways humans are killing out all the bats. And it also is correct because it actually says what the essay is actually about, which is focusing on people's mistaken ideas about bats. So that's it. The answer is C. And when you're finished with this section, you know, just go on to passage 4.